Jack.
Levi.
The Book Club from Hell.
Hello everyone, this is Jack with the Book Club from Hell, a drill bit consultancy advising companies the world over on how they can design the most phallic power tools possible and then successfully bring them to market. Glaciers, Gender and Science, a feminist glaciology framework for global environmental change research, written by Mark Carey, M. Jackson, Alessandro, Antonello and Jaclyn Rushing, and first published online in 2016, is the subject of today's episode. It is at once a description and an exhortation. Of what? Of the need to make glaciology less masculine and scientific, and to use this to combat climate change. In this academic paper, glaciology is understood expansively, encompassing all human ice interactions, as well as the power, gender, and racial dynamics surrounding the ice. In short, we should deprioritise our materialist understanding of glaciers and view them more as an Andean tribeswoman would, living, thinking beings which are offended by the smell of cooking fat. Now, a few pieces of admin before we get into the episode proper. Item 1, our application to the United Nations was successful. As such, the Book Club from Hell is now an accredited global evangelical religion. If you like what we're doing, tell a friend, co-worker, family member, or complete stranger. We'd both really appreciate it, and, again, I remind you that this is now an evangelical movement. It is a religious imperative to preach our gospel. Item 2. Even prophets need the occasional rest. We won't be uploading next week, because Levi and I would like a quick rest. More often than not, we don't actually want to read the books or articles covered in episodes, and sometimes we need time off. Weekly spiritual missives will begin again the following week, as usual. So, if you're ready to learn about the link between ice core drilling and penetrative sex, then listen on. Enjoy. Yeah, for listeners, Levi's in Bali at the moment, and you're probably gonna hear roosters throughout the recording.
Yeah, I'm not in Kuta, which is like the Australians' favourite. Canggu, Kuta, Seminyak, just a filthy den full of Australians. Just getting drunk and getting arrested.
No, Levi's been reading about feminist glaciology with the roosters, all the Balinese roosters.
Literally giving them a sermon on feminist glaciology.
Yeah, telling them all about feminist glaciology. Well, being roosters, they're all male, which means that they need to hear the message of feminist glaciology.
They need to hear it most. They are the problem.
Yeah, they're definitely the problem.
They've eliminated glaciers from the Indonesian archipelago. And secondly,
that's why there are no more glaciers.
All roosters are men
in Bali
because
there are just too many roosters, too much masculinity, and they destroyed.
Too many roosters. They destroyed.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if it were not for the roosters,
the climactic conditions in Bali
are perfect for glaciers. If not for the roosters, it would be overrun with glaciers.
For glaciation. There used to be glaciers everywhere, and they're like 30 degrees tropical weather.
But in the last, really, it's a colonial thing because roosters are not native or endemic to the Indonesian archipelago. They were brought here by the Spaniards. I don't know that.
Yeah, after colonialism and roosters came to Bali, and all the
Spaniards
glaciers
brought something
retreated.
here.
Yeah. The entirety of Bali was just an ice cap, I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty confident in saying that, actually.
Yeah.
That Bali was an ice cap. The rest of Indonesia was tropical, no worries. But Bali was an ice cap.
I'm very confident. Bali, one giant ice cap.
Just a huge ice
Mount Agung, active volcano, used to actually spurt ice.
Yeah, it used to, not in an inverse colonial way. It used to spread ice to non-ice regions.
Yeah, in a consenting,
loving,
somehow consenting, free trade, loving,
not free trade. That's capitalism.
Way.
In the spirit of sharing,
not free trade, like free love. Free love. Sorry, I misspoke. Non-transactional community sharing.
In the spirit of proletarian, I was going to say proletarian brotherhood, but proletarian siblinghood, sisterhood,
non-gendered.
It froze the area around it, but that stopped happening. And we learned This week we learned why that happened without having read the research article.
Because of the Spanish roosters.
What was the name of the journal? Progress in Human Geography. Yeah, published in Progress in Human Geography in 2016. Glaciers, Gender and Science, a Feminist Glaciology Framework for Global Environmental Change Research by Mark Carey, M. Jackson, Alessandro, Antonello and Jaclyn Rushing at the University of Oregon.
Now, it looks like there's at least two men. There's two men, 2 women. I mean, I might be misgendering Mark Carey. I might be misgendering Mark Carey and Alessandro Antonello, but I'm pretty sure Alessandro is the masculine version.
Yeah, I had a look. The person whose name is M is a woman. I had trouble picking whether that was a masculine or a feminine M, but M is a woman.
M. Jackson. Is that her actual name?
No, she has a real name, but she goes by
she
M.
Just said, fuck it.
I'm not sure. Maybe she really got into James Bond or something. I'm not sure, but M... I did extensive research.
The academic formerly known as Michelle.
And M. Jackson's a woman. So, even gender split, which is good, I guess.
This is interesting. Progress in human geography. Because, one of our friends is a geographer. So I speak to her occasionally, ask her about geography. And my girlfriend is kind of para-geography. She's in urban design.
But that's the masculinization of spaces. So she's kind of an anti-geographer.
It is planning.
Yeah. Very masculine, at least according to this article.
Yeah, planning and designing
if you plan and design things, you're probably a man. Which
you're literally penetrating
with these
the
fucking articles. Okay, so with our previous episode on the conceptual penis, which was making fun of articles like this, we said that quite often in these sorts of articles, they'll talk about the need to get rid of gender stereotypes, but then they'll reinforce gender stereotypes while saying that they're not. And this article is 100% that. They keep talking about how we need to avoid reinforcing any sort of gender binary or any sort of gender roles which don't exist. But then they'll come out and say things like, yeah, planning or mathematizing things is penetrating spaces, which is fundamentally masculine. So don't plan anything if you want to be a woman. Just ride by the seat of your pants. Never think more than 30 seconds into the future.
Just kind of...
That's apparently the female experience.
I think about it as flah, 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 flah. That's what I think of these people. Flah, 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 flah. Just be flah, 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 flah. You just kind of butterfly around, and you never try to create a good explanation of things. You never try to put anything on sort of any rigorous grounds, measurable or anything. You just kind of say kumbaya, fucking everybody's opinion is equal.
Except for when they disagree.
Except for men. And if it's a man and a woman, the man's being a fucking dominator,
dominator,
fucking pig, and needs to move over and make space.
How about I read the abstract to give people an idea of this sort of article, or what this article was like to read. Glaciers are key icons of climate change and global environmental change. However, the relationships among gender, science, and glaciers, particularly related to epistemological questions about the production of glaciological knowledge, remain understudied. This paper thus proposes a feminist glaciology framework with 4 key components. 1. Knowledge producers. 2. Gendered science and knowledge. 3. Systems of scientific domination. And 4. Alternative representations of glaciers. Merging feminist post-colonial science studies and feminist political ecology, the feminist glaciology framework generates robust analysis of gender, power, and epistemologies in dynamic, social ecological systems, thereby leading to more just and equitable science and human ice interactions. I wouldn't want to be unfair to ice. So as I normally do for this podcast, I actually do try to take the things we read seriously, or seriously enough that I could try to work out where they're coming from. The authors of this paper made that very difficult. It was very hard to take this remotely seriously. They bring up things that are real problems and real things to be addressed, but then go about addressing those problems in at least what I regard as a completely frivolous way. How did you find this article?
Well, I thought, so for listeners, there's several key concepts, and they sort of roughly track the three or four major parts of each section, like the academic paper standard, like section titles. There's knowledge producers, gendered science and knowledge. Number 3 is systems of scientific domination. Number 4 is alternative representation of glaciers. I thought that sections 1, 2, and 3 were fine. I mean, I had to stretch my try to stretch, and then I just thought that section 4 just jumped the shark, and I was just like, okay, well, this is ridiculous. But I've got an interesting my perspective. I've tried to come around to not to agree with the sort of postmodernisty or whatever they call it these days, postmodernist or post-structuralist, something like that point of view. I think it's post-structuralism, isn't it? It's like when there's multiple epistemologies based on like the superstructures inside of which knowledge is created. So but I don't know enough about this stuff, but I think that's roughly what it is. I guess can I just jump into roughly what my framework for thinking through this is?
Yeah, go for it.
So, and I'm not going to go on a fucking Popper or Deutsch rant, okay? I'm just going to say what I think.
Yeah, but both those things actually are quite relevant to this paper, like extremely relevant.
So I've now, okay, when I'm passing texts like this, when they say epistemologies, so they like certain words, they like epistemologies, they like ontologies, they like representations, they like these sorts of things, or cushy-wushy.
If people don't know what those things mean, can you just say what, like, briefly epistemology and ontology is?
Epistemology means the study of knowledge, so episteme. Actually, I thought episteme meant something along the lines of belief, but anyways, it's the study of science. It's the study of knowledge and or how knowledge grows. Then there's ontologies, which is like, I guess it's like, one way I think of it is like, what is the nature of being and what things exist? What else do they like in these sorts of, and like fundamental categories of like being and existence? Representations, so you might think like, so like within a cultural context, like say how is a particular thing actually spoken about, referenced, what are the subtexts whenever the thing is referenced? So like, I don't know, maybe in the 1950s, like representations of women, that one's kind of obvious. Or representations of like, I don't know, Latin American people in the 1960s in the US is very different to like the representation of Latin American people in 2010s or something like that. And what's the other major concept that I feel like there's one other major concept that these people bring up a lot, but the main one I wanted to talk about was epistemologies, because my current understanding of epistemology is basically that there's not epistemologies, there's just epistemology. There's one epistemology, and you can't have multiple epistemologies. And when I pass what this person is saying, I actually I sub out the word epistemologies and insert instead sociology of epistemology. Mm-hmm. And that's a slightly nuanced thing to say, because I'm trying to give these people, I'm trying to like understand where these people are coming from. I think that there's like basically information, and information is like essentially, it's hard to say what information is, but we can say that like physical substrate can embody information if the physical substrate can occupy at least two distinguishable states, and information is that entity which can be copied onto information-bearing substrates, and when it gets copied, the creation of the second copy doesn't destroy the creation of the first copy. And so when a system encodes information, that means that some part of its state space, so like if it's like an electron around like a silicon atom, it might be like what valence around the like electron the electron is around the atom. So if it's like a higher valence or a lower valence, we might say that that is encoding 1 or 0. And so basically we can put the states of physical systems into correspondence with this thing we called information. And and basically like knowledge is a type of information that has causal power. So like a really obvious example of this is like an algorithm. An algorithm is a form of knowledge that like when I instantiate it on the physical chip of my computer, it will make the physical computer do something different. Like algorithm A will do something different from algorithm B. A good example of this is like the sorting algorithms. Like a brute force sorting algorithm will run like with a particular time function, and like a logarithmic sorting algorithm will have a different like time function. And so an algorithm is a piece of information, but it has causal power. And and that information with causal power is knowledge. That's what I understand knowledge is. And basically, I'll just pull in Popper here to say quickly, like this view of knowledge is a view of knowledge that can account for like what is going on in the genome. So like there's knowledge encoded in the physical like system of the genetic code. There's knowledge. It also can account for like how algorithms work. It can also account for like the transmission of like knowledge from like one human mind to another. And so it's basically physical systems encode information. Some of that information, if it's causal, that's knowledge. And the only other caveat to that is that like knowledge can correspond to the world. And if it corresponds, if like a piece of knowledge A and a piece of knowledge B both correspond to the same, like are both accounts of like the world, we say that like A is more true than B if A has more correspondence or can account for more facts than B. And so that's what I think knowledge is. And when these people say epistemologies, what I understand they're saying like the social context in which knowledge is created within it, like human societies and cultures and institutions. And so I'm kind of not invalidating what they're saying. What I'm saying is there's actually something abstract and independent of the entity in the universe that we call knowledge. Like if there's alien species out there, they will also be creating knowledge, and it's causal information that can correspond to the world. But they will have a different sociology of how that like knowledge is created and distributed within their societies and that sort of thing. Does that make sense? And sorry if that was a bit long-winded.
That's really relevant to this particular paper, because a large part of this paper, as we'll talk about, is so they talk about the need to unsettle Western science from its central position. And I take issue with that idea of Western science. I don't think it's been specifically Western for quite at least a few decades, if not a century. Like that's a very old or antiquated opinion.
Yeah, so the relativization of explanatory knowledge is what I like Deutsch would call anti-rational, and I would say like I strongly disagree with that. But to the degree that if you want to say that there's like a Western sociological context around like say like I can engage in that conversation, which is it went through that lens. I can look at an article like this with a lot more like I guess like. What would you say, like open-mindedness, I suppose.
To be honest, to like, especially to listeners, because you know my beliefs. Like, I'm not inclined, like, temperamentally inclined to be generous to this form of thinking. I regard it as often pretty frivolous. So, like, I'm making a big effort to be.
Jack's just like, fuck these people.
Especially when they'll say things like just things that I consider to be really racist. Like much of this just gives the impression, or at least I get the impression, that the authors on some level think that non-white people or non-Europeans just don't understand the world rationally or in any sort of causal way and should be kept in that position because the authors don't like the West or something like that.
It's fucking unbelievably paternalistic. Fucking unbelievably.
Like, a lot of it feels extremely racist to me.
Yeah, but it's that sort of racism. You know, like, have you ever heard that criticism of modern feminism where it's like, I've heard second-generation feminists speak of modern, like, maybe third wave or post-third wave, this, like, new form of, like, feminist, like, trans-inclusionary feminism, as like oftentimes undermining women's like autonomy, and like even the idea that it's like it frames women as just completely victims of their circumstances and stuff. Like analogously, non-Western people in an article like this, what they don't realize is that it's like they're playing like little daddy, like a daddy, and there's this little indigenous person, and they have these funny stories about the world, and they can't possibly understand like how glaciers work. So we're just gonna like deconstruct Western science and then not actually like treat the say like indigenous peoples in the Andes or whatever with the dignity of like actually holding them to like critically analyzing what they're saying.
Yeah, it's this view that if you're not either like from Australia, New Zealand, North America, or Europe, you're just not equipped to hear, say, rationalist explanations of the world. Otherwise, your worldview will crumble, and like you just won't be able to handle that. And so we need to fence off all of these noble savages.
Yeah, the noble. It's the noble savage side.
They're comfortable. Like it just, to me, it feels so unbelievably paternalistic. But also, it's phrased in these terms that the authors are doing the right thing, and no one else, or people who don't agree with the authors, are just ill-intentioned and wish to destroy all non-Westerners and things like that. So, and I was just saying, like, I am not inclined to be generous to this sort of worldview. I view it as extremely counterproductive. So I'm making a really big effort this episode to be open-minded. It's a good exercise for me.
Yeah, and I'm going to caveat everything I say in this episode with like, oh man, excuse me. I don't know if that burp came through, but that was a whopper.
Just being overly, you're trying to suppress your overwhelming masculinity, just belching into the microphone.
Yeah, sorry, I should have just gone full like Barney and just did straight into the microphone. So just before like we really get into more of it, they're really interesting discussions. Like I'm an indigenous person to Australia, but I'm an indigenous person who's had like what some people would call like a Western scientific education, and I grew up having certain experiences with like non-Western, say, Aboriginal traditional medicines and stuff. So I've also like spent a lot of time in academic situations with like indigenous academics who are basically like doing some of the stuff that we're going to be criticizing in this article. And so I come from the point of view of like I try to see both sides of it, but I actually find these people, and I'll just make note that like I don't know for sure, but it sounds like at least 3 out of 4, if not all 4 of the authors, maybe 3 out of 4 of the authors, are potentially like Anglo-Saxon European descent in like colonial, like what is it, like Oregon? Oregon. So I find it really, really deeply. I don't want to be a little bitch about it. I shouldn't say offensive. I just think like we don't, as an indigenous person, I don't need some like people feeling sorry for us. Some and then not like actually saying, why don't we put beside some of these stories about glaciers coming out of food and stuff? Like maybe that's not a good thing that people believe those things. and you shouldn't, like I find it really paternalistic and I don't like it.
At least so I don't have that background of yours, obviously. However, I do, like, I grew up in circles who were more likely to write articles like this. Like, people who definitely had an extreme degree of white guilt, highly educated, perhaps overeducated. We're covering this from multiple angles.
I think we're coming at this from an interesting angle. The only thing that would be beneficial would be to have somebody who's more left-leaning than us. Maybe they would be able to talk some sense to us while we do it.
Because they bring up things that are real problems in this. It's just then their solutions to the problems, I feel like, will just make everything worse.
Yeah. Well, okay.
Yeah,
So why
let's
don't we
actually talk
start
about it.
like talking about the major concepts? It's pretty easy. So there's three major concepts. So basically, they're upset about the I guess over masculinity present in glaciological research, and they talk about these four key concepts, which we'll go over: knowledge production or knowledge producers, gendered science and knowledge, systems of scientific domination, and four alternative representations of glaciers.
Do you want to just run, like this episode,
so-
just run through those in order? Basically, like that can be the structure.
Yeah, I think that's really easy, and yep, and we can just sort of ad lib about them, and yeah,
Yeah.
and it's not like we've ever scripted an episode. Everything we do is an ad lib.
we read these articles or these books. I make notes on them and I'll collect some quotes. I haven't released my notes because
that's in the spirit of a book club,
they are
though,
basically
right?
just things that remind me of what to talk about. And I just don't think they're very useful for other people to learn things.
Also, like Jack's handwriting is barely like legible.
Yeah. My handwriting was bad to begin with.
You should
and
upload
then in medical education. Absolutely, and like especially work in a hospital, absolutely demolished it.
Yeah. It's like the other thing is would be funny is like you know those pictures of the Columbine shooters.
Where's this going?
Letters? You can actually see the scans. That's Jack's notes for the episode. It's just we have this compendium of Jack's notes. It just gets uploaded. And it just gets listed on a terrorist watch list. They're like, look at his notes, man. Just the scribblings of a madman.
It is hieroglyphics.
There's actually a secret code in there.
After our civilization has been dead for millennia, future archaeologists, the only remnants of our civilization left will be my notes for the
Jack's
book club
notes.
from hell. I just imagine all of these people in future universities sitting around trying to work out what my notes mean, and then transcripts of the Discord server.
Yeah, I imagine San Marzano might like sponsor a Jack Notes like
Time capsule.
Conservation effort and just time capsule, just engrave them on titanium or something like that, put them in the Arctic. And then future generations will just have like a backup of GitHub and Jack's notes to this show.
Yeah. And they'll try to resurrect the English language from my notes.
Shakespearean.
Yeah, exactly.
Shakespearean Jack.
It'll have, because it will be old, it will have an air of refinement about it.
So knowledge producers. So this is like one of the key parts where I was talking about like the sociology of epistemology. Or the anthropology, maybe the anthropology of epistemology.
How about we start off even before that? It's because they have this section of why do we need feminist glaciology, and basically,
why do we need feminist?
So they say
glaciology.
Climate change
is
bad, and like again, this is why a lot of the things they point out I don't disagree with. It's like, yeah, I agree, climate change is bad. So they go, okay, climate change is bad, and a way that climate change manifests itself is that glaciers are melting. And glaciers, like climate change has been, they say, so okay, we'll go with their argument. Climate change is caused by a patriarchal, capitalist, colonialist system, which is underpinned and powered by Western science. So in order to help alleviate climate change, we need to bring in non-Western perspectives, non-scientific perspectives, and non-masculine perspectives to try to counteract that. So feminist glaciology seeks to bring to the forefront of glaciological research knowledge that has been previously marginalized. So they call it folk glaciology. I said that I was going to try to be generous. So the perspectives...
I want folk science in everything I do. I want folk aerospace engineering the next time I jump on a plane.
Okay, for a second I'm not going to be generous. It's basically they're the sort of white people who just look at anything that's non-European and immediately go, oh, that's so beautiful. It's especially when people start describing things that are foreign as beautiful. I'm like, you're not taking this seriously, are you? It's like you're just saying that because it's not from your culture. It's basically they look at everything that's not Western. Like, not being Western is the criterion which they care about, the sole one. And they look at it and go, okay, non-Western, so therefore it's valid. And I like it.
It's an overcorrection.
Doesn't matter what the cultural context surrounding it is. I just like it.
Yeah, it's an overcorrection to, like, I see it as an overcorrection to, racism slash, you know, colonization. Pretty bad. Colonization.
Yeah.
Pretty bad. We're not going to, you know, I mean, I'm not going to. Jack might.
Yeah, I'll defend
I'm not going to get up here and say that colonization is a good thing. But yeah, there's an overcorrection where it's like, you know, like, for example, I'm in Indonesia right now. And because it's a former fascist state, I'm not going to say anything about the Indonesian government that would be bad, because it's a great government, and I love the Indonesian government.
Is it still Joko Widodo who's in charge?
Joko Willing.
Joko Willing. Yeah.
Willing's in charge of Indonesia.
Nice.
Yeah.
No, I'm just making sure which world leader I need to say on the podcast is my best friend. Insofar as really Joko Widodo is still leading Indonesia, I love him. I have pictures of him on my walls. I've drawn furry pornography. I've not drawn furry pornography of him. Where was this guy? Oh, yeah. You were saying it was an overcorrection.
Oh, yeah. But anyway, there might be criticisms that you could levy against Indonesia, but there's also, like, amazingly beautiful culture and dance and fucking all sorts of cool stuff happening in a booming tech sector and heaps of cool stuff. But then there's lots of issues elsewhere in the country. And sometimes, but even you could say of, like, any particular culture, there's issues within, like, well, I don't want to throw stones at, like, Indonesian culture, so I'm not going to do that. But, like, say within Australian culture, you could say, like, well, say the drinking stuff in Australia, that's bad. But that doesn't mean that that there aren't other parts of Australian culture that are great. Like, mateship is very good. I think the mateship culture in Australia can be really good. And but if I were a non-Australian person saying that, you know, like, some people might get uppity about it. Where is all this going? All I'm saying is that, like, there's almost like it's condescending.
Yes, that sums up this
the way
entire article.
These people at the University of Oregon, of all places, you know, treat Indigenous peoples. It's condescending.
It's almost as if they just don't recognize that non-Western cultures are creations of human beings as well. That human beings are flawed. That we're not perfect, and human cultures are not going to be perfect. And that doesn't mean they're necessarily bad. It just means that, say, Indigenous cultures around the world are made by people. They're going to be problems. They're going to be good bits. They're going to be bad bits. This sounds like the most wishy-washy fence-sitting thing to say.
Such a dull thing to say.
True. And if you start deifying non-Westerners and looking at their cultures completely uncritically, you're going to have such a skewed view of the world.
Yeah, like African American culture, amazing rap, pretty bad gang violence. You know,
it's like if someone looked at that and goes, "That gang violence is
really
so
good rap
beautiful.
music.
It's such a beautiful expression of
gang violence is so beautiful."
No, it's not.
Booty clapping and pole dancing is beautiful. Getting shot in the head with an Uzi 5 times is not beautiful.
Yeah.
But I guess it's pick your poison, right, Jack? So whatever. Fucking love Gucci Mane, so I don't give a fuck. Wherever he came out of, I like it.
You've got to accept the bad with the good.
No, that's not true. I don't like Gucci Mane. I loved fat Gucci Mane. I loved fat Gucci Mane back in his Chicken Talk days. Man, he sold out when he got jacked. When he took the face tattoo off his face, he took the ice cream off his face, he got healthy, and he started singing about love and shit. He sold out like a little bitch.
I want old Gucci Mane back, the guy who murdered someone with an ice cream tattooed on his face.
just this, one of his video clips is just him just being a fat fuck sitting in his, like, trap house in Atlanta with, like, a bunch of women just, like, shaking their booties, and he's just got, like, stacks of, like, cocaine or whatever the fuck around him. And I'm pretty sure it was like actually real, like, it was actual drugs, it was actual guns, and he's just singing about, like, all the shit that he used to do when he was slinging drugs in Atlanta or wherever he's from.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's beautiful. I think that's beautiful. I don't think that he killed somebody who was beautiful, though.
No, not really.
Then who's to say what art is?
Exactly. Okay, so what was... Oh, we were talking about, why is feminist glaciology needed? Yeah, so that we can seek non-patriarchal, non-Western, non-scientific epistemologies which can help solve climate change, I think is the basic motivating premise.
Hold on, wait up. Can I just say one thing, Jack? Sorry, I know this is super important. Like, what you're talking about is on topic. I just want to highlight that there's 1,300 different ethnic groups in Indonesia.
Fucking hell. Yeah, but how many islands are in Indonesia? Indonesia is basically 1,000 different countries just smashed into one that somehow holds together.
I think there's 6,000. Is there 6,000 islands? I think there's 6,000 islands in the Indonesian archipelago.
Indonesia's a wild place.
I fucking love Indonesia. It's so cool. Yeah, so, I'm sure there were lots of glaciers here just a few hundred years ago before they were colonized. And all 1,300 ethnic groups back then were just like hanging out in the ice.
Yeah.
Before colonization.
All just sunbathing on the ice in the Balinese sun.
Yeah. Taking boatloads of tea.
Taking magic mushrooms.
Getting ripped.
I want to read a quote too. So one thing about this article that did make me feel less generous to it is the word salad. The prose style in this is absolutely atrocious at times. I quote, "More recently, glaciology has also been central to Earth systems science that often relies on remote sensing from satellite imagery to suggest broader claims of objectivity, but is actually akin to the God trick of seeing everywhere from nowhere. Questions about epistemology and climate science, ice coring and glaciology are only beginning to be asked, especially focusing on Cold War polar glaciology." I just wanted to bring it up because it's just a word dump.
Yeah.
There are very few commas in there. So it might have sounded like there were commas because I have to breathe. But when you're writing this stuff, that's not necessary.
Presumably, at least one of these 4 people got paid to write this.
Yeah, they got funding for this from the US government.
Yeah, from the US. Yeah, the US government, and not like the US National Science Foundation. Presumably, that's a prestigious body to be funded by. Sounds prestigious. Sounds
very prestigious.
Fucking authoritative, doesn't it? Yeah, the US National Science Foundation. And here we have Feminist Glaciology.
Oh, here we go. I found a quote, actually, which is basically the elevator pitch for a feminist glaciological framework. "Feminist glaciology raises critical conceptual, analytical, and epistemological questions that are largely absent in the 21st century love affair with glaciers and ice." Short and snappy, but there are so many things there that are just kind of vaguely defined. Basically, they're trying to develop a framework to analyse glaciers within to help with climate change. For listeners, that's the basic idea of this.
They're trying to take their... let me see, what do they have? We've got a PhD in... this woman got a Fulbright.
Damn.
Wow. She got a Fulbright National Science Foundation Arctic Research Fellow. Are you fucking kidding me? Dude, what? That's so cool. That is so fucking cool. There's people who do actual research and actual science who would love to have that sort of funding. And this person is writing this garbage. What is this? What the fuck is this?
Generosity just went out the
window. I find that so ridiculous. Are you kidding me? And now she gets to say that she's a Fulbright scholar? Oh, man. Yeah, no more generosity here. This is a bunch of garbage. These people don't need my generosity. They need to be scorned.
Because the person called M is a proper polar explorer and shit.
That's fucking cool. Well, she might be cool in terms of what she does, but this paper, I hope that she doesn't stand by this paper. I hope she just throws the rest of her colleagues under the bus and just completely disowns this paper because she sounds cool, but this paper is trash. So let me see. Anyways, we got environmental studies, romantic languages. Yeah, so these are all Western knowledge. Here's the thing: where do they get off like being all like, oh, Western knowledge production is all patriarchal and shit, and they all come from Western
but
knowledge
seriously,
production.
like being really
Like-
honest, how many people get tied up in knots about the need to eliminate whiteness, or the need to eliminate Westernness, or the need to eliminate, I don't know, the impact of the highly educated on knowledge production? Who gets wound up about this stuff? Who aren't white, highly educated, often male. Like it's a pattern. The sort of people who are in this tend to be members of all of the groups that they rail against.
Well, I just think so. Again, I was saying like I was indigenous. I am indigenous. As far as I'm aware, that didn't stop. That didn't stop at any point.
When you were ontologically transformed in the book club from hell initiation ritual,
transformed
you stopped
into a
being
white
of
person.
the earth, of the human race. So.
Of the human race, I transcended. What was that rich piano like?
Leaving humanity behind.
Beyond leaving humanity behind. Levi ontologically transformed, left behind my ethnicity, and I've left humanity and Indigenous Australia behind, and just become like a raceless like blob in space. Just.
You've just become Rich Piana. You've become a walking refrigerator.
Walking refrigerator just full of testosterone and GH.
You're the reincarnation of Rich Piana, and as such are no longer Indigenous because you're no longer human.
Yeah, and I'm just made of pure scientific objectivity. So everything I say is valid.
Epicurean Rich Piana.
So... So there are Indigenous. So there's this whole conversation in Australia and New Zealand and Canada with Indigenous academia where they talk about decolonizing methodologies. And there's an interesting thing around like social science research, which is like if you're coming from a Western like academy situation. So like history. So let me set this up really briefly. Basically, historically, anthropologists were guilty of this the most. Like they would go into like an Indigenous community, write whatever papers they need about that, get all this like career funding or whatever, and just kind of like use a community as like the subject of their research. And there would be no benefit kind of flowing back to the community. And the community wouldn't even necessarily have like any like input into that research once that person has like done their like forensic whatever and then fucked off. And so there's this like backlash in Indigenous communities against that sort of research where now people care more like, well, does the research actually like matter to the community? Like, is there participatory stuff? Like, is there other stakeholder engagement? And I think there's valid stuff in that. But a lot of what they talk about is also like, well, if you're a non-Indigenous person going to an Indigenous community and you want to do some research, instead of doing it about them, do it with them. And like, therefore, if you're going to go and do some research paper, don't just have like 4 white dudes just rock up in an Indigenous community. Like, why don't you, hey, here's a fucking crazy idea. Why don't you ask somebody from the community to be like a co-author and work with you? Like, groundbreaking like, idea.
Hey, maybe the people who live in this community know a lot about the community you want to know about.
Yeah. And I think that's all valid. And then so I'm coming from that sort of academic like thinking where I just think like, okay, like, yeah, don't come into my community and then study me and then like I'm a fucking animal at a zoo, you fuck.
Yeah.
And then I just see like, okay, potentially 4, maybe 3, but potentially 4 like, like Americans from the University of Oregon just like put up look, these Indigenous people from the Andes or whatever the fuck, like let's just use those as our like anti-Western like punching bags. Mm-hmm. We can like hide behind the poor Indigenous people and say like, oh yeah, this person has this like folklore about glaciers, so like fuck the West.
So from the perspective of someone who's definitely like more left the world of like overwhelming white guilt that makes you describe everything that's not white as beautiful. It does strike me that mostly these...
Jack's gone the other way.
Yeah, exactly. It's just really like I wear my SS uniform when I go to bed and then put on a Klansman hood when I wake up. I'm just moving between all of the different white nationalist ideologies. I haven't settled on one yet. Overcorrecting hard. But it seems to me that oftentimes, like, non-Westerners are just used as, like, almost pieces of evidence for discussions within Western contexts. Like, there'll be a disagreement within a Western country or within a Western culture. For example, within, say, modern American culture or within British culture. And the discussion is always in that context. And where non-Westerners come in is to be used as pieces of evidence. So in this, it's like, oh, look, we've got these people in the Andes who understand glaciers in this way. It's never really, it doesn't seem to be done necessarily for those people. The ultimate goal always seems to be to take part in a conversation or an argument within a Western context.
And it's inevitably in order to, like, tear down the West. At the same time, these people will be like, yeah, well, these people in the Andes, they need electricity and access to the internet. It's like, guess what, motherfuckers? It's called Maxwell's equations. Maxwell. Yeah. Sounds pretty fucking Western to me. Where was the internet invented? It's like, hey, maybe this, like, categorization of things into Western and, like, non-Western, this binary setup, is actually a false dichotomy. And it's not that simple.
Yeah. Like, we'll get around to this and probably talk about it in more detail. But they do say that the scientific method of understanding the world is Western and exclusively Western, they almost seem to be saying.
And then what would they say to somebody like me?
And we need to look for alternate views of it. The thing is, I disagree with that quite profoundly because it hasn't just been the West performing knowledge generation using the scientific method for a long time. I mean, so you look at the Chinese; it's a scientific powerhouse. And last time I checked, China wasn't Western. So you look at the South Koreans, like, again, industrial and scientific powerhouse. They're not Western. It's this intellectual tool that most of that intellectual apparatus arose in the West or was first assembled in the West. The thing is, it's such a powerful intellectual tool that it is spread around the world, and the cultures which have adopted it have been able to generate knowledge in a way that they just weren't able to before. It's just like, it just hasn't been Western for a long time.
Generate unbelievable amounts of wealth. Like, it's just like, people don't understand, just like, man, all you got to do is, like, go to a fucking country where they just haven't had as much time for, like, capital to develop and as much how would you say, like, adoption of an open society ethic and, like, science and technology. Like, even there's certain parts of Bali, like, okay, there's certain parts of Bali which are, like, pretty westernized, so to say, but, like, other parts of it, you just drive around, it's like, people are fucking poor.
Yeah.
Like, people are dirt fucking poor, and it's completely fucking patronizing. And there's parts of Australia where you just go in, like, rural, like, deep fucking Western Australia or Northern Territory. Like, you go into those communities and, like, on the one hand, it's like, okay, like, we don't want to tell people how to think or how to behave or whatever, but people are dealing with real fucking issues, like, kids, they're, like, not able to breathe properly in certain parts of, like, Northern Territory because the particulate matter in the air is too fucking, is this fine dust, and what those people need is, on the one hand, like, filtration systems in their air conditioning, and two, they need the actual human capital, the knowledge production skills, so that they don't just rely on like a white engineer from Melbourne flying in, but, like, they can have people from their community solving those problems. And to say otherwise, I think it's just absolutely, completely fucking condescending. It's completely ridiculous. It's completely fucking ridiculous.
I do get the impression with this article that they're basically
and that's why
that
sorry, I'm getting fucking, this pisses me off, man. Now I'm getting pissed off. Sorry, why don't you talk and I'm gonna go take a slash.
I was getting really worked up when I was reading it, and I had to go and vent to my wife because it does feel like what they are. We will actually discuss parts of this paper in more detail soon, but I'm sure we'll also vent while doing it. It just feels like that this is a real ideology of entropy, and specifically entropy of non-white people. So it does seem that they look at non-Western cultures and even non-white people within Western cultures, they still hold within their minds, it seems, this distinction where they want those people to keep basically aspects of culture which don't generate knowledge to nearly the same degree, and to prevent them from forming cultural systems to generate greater amounts of knowledge and get more wealth, more technology, and become better able to defend themselves. So I guess so with colonization is an example. So they talk about colonization being bad, which is one of the points of agreement I have with this paper. It's like, yep, you're pointing out a real problem. But their solution to it seems to be a very paternalistic one, in that you'll get the technologically very advanced society. So for example, Western society, and then take some sort of society which just hasn't been able to generate as much capital, as much knowledge, or as much technological advancement, and basically have that culture exist almost as a subordinate culture under the protection of the wealthy, high knowledge culture, and to just keep things that way. And it just seems like a really unsustainable way to have a culture, to have one culture that exists basically so long as the wealthier and more powerful culture is willing to support them.
White savior
I just think if you want to maintain cultures, the best way to do it is to have that culture have the ability to generate wealth and knowledge so that they can defend themselves.
Okay, if I can summarize it. Okay, so there was this paradigm in oh man, sorry, I'm sorry for cutting you off. Do you want to finish that thought?
No, go for it.
There's this. Okay, so there's a lot of bad stuff that happened in Australia, in the Australian history, between like Aboriginal people and early colonists, and like all you have to, like, for all those non-Australian people, like, just go and look it up. Like, there's this guy named Henry Reynolds. He's got good stuff that goes in great details. There's a book, Why Weren't We Told? Every, in my opinion, non-Indigenous Australian should probably read a book like that, or Dark Emu. But there's also stuff like there's some bad stuff that happened. But one of the things that was bad was like some of the white Europeans, like, it was really the British. Like, it wasn't white Europeans. It was like the British colonialists. Like, they came in with the attitude that they were actually doing the right thing. You know, like, they were, in some situations, not all situations, I'm kind of broad strokes here, like, saw themselves as, like, civilizing the savages. And then other situations was like, as we move forward in to like a modern context, you still have this like hangover where like there's people doing stuff in Indigenous communities where it feels as though, as an Indigenous person, there's a strong sense of essentially like, it's almost like pity or something, and I don't know if you can draw a straight line from like that history to the current context of the way that development work is done, or international development work, or like whatever. But at the end of the day, I think Aboriginal people, Indigenous people from the Andes, white Australians, Americans, like, we're all just people, you know, and we all have the same fundamental capacity to create knowledge and create explanatory knowledge and understand explanatory knowledge and use that knowledge to solve problems in the world. And until like you actually just take that capacity seriously, you can't actually make progress in this space. Like, I think it's deeply I don't know, as I said, like, condescending or paternalistic to say that an Indigenous Andes person, look, the reason why the scientific method, there's not really method, but like the scientific attitude works is because of criticism. Like, we criticize the fuck out of everything in the West. And when you abstain from criticizing directly Indigenous or non-Western explanations of, say, like, natural phenomena, when you say, like, well, we're not going to criticize that because it's cultural knowledge, or, you know, it's pre-European cultural knowledge. It's like, I can understand why you might say, like, anthropologically that's interesting to keep around, but if you're saying that, like, no, we're not going to criticize them, we're just going to let that community, like, just wallow in the poverty of thinking that glaciers are formed out of spilling oil on the fucking ground, like, you're a fucking asshole. You're an asshole. At the end of the day, okay, I'll give you an interesting story just to demonstrate my point. When I was a little kid, I spent some time in the desert. I'm not from the desert, but like, my family's not from the desert, but like, I went out to the desert and I spent some time with an Aboriginal elder from a different part. So there's like many different language groups, Aboriginal language groups, and where I come from, Sydney, it's heavily colonised, heavy colonisation history, and so a lot of people from New South Wales, they'll go and spend time with other communities where they haven't had as much colonisation in order to like have a sense of like connection to cultural continuity. And I spent some time with a particular elder in the central desert region, and he was like a traditional medicine man. You say like a, I don't know how you say it otherwise, but like traditional medicine man. And I broke my finger when I was out in the middle of the desert. I like dropped a pickaxe or something on it when I was just like digging a hole. I don't know what the fuck I was digging a hole in the middle of the desert for when I was like 10, but that's what I was doing. And now, to this day, one of my fingers is slightly crooked still. And when I went into that man, and I have fond memories of him, and I love him and respect him as a person. He's passed away now. But what he did is he did some stuff with my finger that had absolutely no effect on the finger. It didn't fix the fact that the bone had been broken. And it's still crooked, and it doesn't matter. The universe doesn't care what culture the person was who was treating the finger. It only mattered that the finger was broken, and that in order to fix the broken finger, you need to actually do certain things to it, which this particular person did not do because he was practicing, he was using explanations based on mysticism and tradition that hadn't been held to criticism. Whereas if I'd gone to a quote-unquote Western doctor, they would have been like, yep, that's a broken finger, probably need to put it in a fucking cast, mate. For what that's worth. Yeah. I don't know if it's worth anything.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sure we'll get back to talking about our issues with this, not just paper, but with this worldview, probably very shortly. But like, I'll try to steel man aspects of it, or say bits of it that I liked. So in the knowledge producers part, it says that, okay, men and masculinity have dominated glaciology and science more broadly, at least historically. So women were excluded from universities and from science. They weren't taken seriously. Their contributions, when they did make them, weren't acknowledged or were just attributed to a man.
Yeah.
All of this stuff is true. Yeah, like this is real. When they're saying it, it's like, yep, this was a problem.
Yeah, that's a problem.
It is improving, but it remains a problem.
Yep.
And it's like, I hear that and go, yep, tick, agree.
Sure, can acknowledge
that. They say that glaciology was particularly bad because it was influenced by polar exploration and mountaineering, which are described as masculine pursuits. And they say that those pursuits particularly...
Why are they masculine?
So they say that they overvalue things like courage, problem solving, being able to withstand hardship. To which I would say, I'm not sure I would describe those as masculine, because it follows from that women are not courageous, not able to withstand hardship, and not able to solve problems. Which, again, with this whole worldview, I just think, like, if you think about it for a second, it's pretty fucking sexist. Like, they say a bunch of things indirectly about women that I would not say.
So here's the issue. Like, we're not going to talk a lot about her because that's not what we do. We don't talk about too much about our personal lives on the show. But all three of those adjectives could be applied to Jack's wife. She's she's awesome. She's courageous, and she's good problem solver, and she's what was the other one? Like those are all like great things. And they apply to Jack's wife. There's nothing about those three characteristics or any of the other characteristics that are inherently quote unquote masculine or anti-feminine. That's just a bunch of fucking nonsense.
Yeah. And so they go on from... So I get, like, we'll just accept, okay, that glaciology is particularly masculine because it values these masculine traits that are that are necessary or at least valued in pursuits like mountaineering and polar exploration. But even then, from that, I wouldn't say that, because the culture around glaciology has been male-dominated, I don't think that means that it's epistemologically male, because they then go on to say that knowledge generated from this is epistemologically male. And I just don't...
It's like, it just penetrates your mind.
Yeah.
Like a big, hard intellectual cock.
The anaconda cock.
A whole new dimension
of
of getting
glaciological
mind-fucked.
knowledge. The fleshy French baguette of glaciology.
What is the oyster prodder or something?
Was it the mayonnaise shooting hot dog
The
gun?
custard gun.
Or whatever the fuck was quoted in the conceptual penis. But anyway, yeah, I just fundamentally don't accept that the scientific... Yeah, you're right, it's not a method, it's more a posture towards the world, is a fundamentally male
culture
way of viewing the world. Because I don't think that knowledge generation, trying to generate knowledge that corresponds to whatever is external to human beings, is a fundamentally
fucking
male thing to do.
I swear to God, I'm not going to go on a popper rant.
No, a popper rant actually, in the context of this paper, is really, really opposite.
Fine. There's one I won't do a full rant or sermon. I'll just do like a little sprinkling here and there. There's two interesting things that Popper said. One was when he first started as the lecturer. He was the first professor of scientific method at the university, at the London School of Economics, where he taught until he died. He said, I am, perhaps the only professor of the scientific method in all of the British Empire, and I'm here to tell you that there is no scientific method. And what he meant by that is that, like, if there were like a master algorithm for creating new and better explanations about the world and how to understand the world, we could just sort of like programmatically we could sort of robotically apply that algorithm to just create new knowledge. And in fact, and that is not the case, because it seems as though every time there's a big like breakthrough of like understanding the world, it's like it's not merely just a new fact, it's like a new mode of understanding. Like good examples like Darwinian evolution is a really good one, or like or even if you've learnt about like Einsteinian like general relativity, like the mind fuck of like actually thinking, oh, it's like time dilation, like getting your head around time dilation. Like, what was the algorithm that was being applied, to just arbitrarily generate new knowledge? No, it doesn't work like that. So there is no scientific method, but there is creativity and there is criticism. And so the only thing that really matters is that there should be, and Popper just puts it so beautifully, he just says, it's a culture of criticism. That's what we need. We just need a culture of criticism where people can make bold guesses, as Feynman would say. You can make bold guesses, but then you can submit them to harsh criticism. And that's the closest thing we've got to an algorithm at the moment. And it's an extremely vague algorithm. It's certainly not one that we can code into a computer. And that is what's generated all of the breakthroughs in all the great breakthroughs, both like in the natural sciences, but I'd also argue in like culture and the arts, is like people like even Mozart being able to like take bold guesses in the form of like aesthetic guesses with music. And in his case, like submitting them to the harsh criticism of his own artistic like goals. But with regards to the context in which that happens, like the social context that happens, the reason why it works and the reason why these people at the University of Oregon are such pernicious little shitbags is because we need to protect the culture of criticism. Like, I'm not going to mention any particular country, is certainly not the country that I'm in right now, but in certain places, criticizing the government or criticizing certain public figures is either illegal or like borderline illegal. And questioning, like in certain societies, like in certain situations, like I can speak about my situation, for example, like under certain circumstances when I was a kid, like criticizing certain things to do with like traditional knowledge was not like socially acceptable, and that means that you can't make progress because you can't like error correct. And what these people are doing is like they're attacking the very institution that they're at, the University of Oregon, and more broadly the Western institutions. That like these are just like little pockets where like criticizing, where there's no authoritative source of knowledge. There is no authoritative source of knowledge, and these people are like saying, "Oh no, like the Western institution is an authoritative source of knowledge, and it's like going out and destroying like the indigenous Andes knowledge," and they're creating this like false good guy, bad guy, villain, victim like narrative in the world, which is just not. It's just not true. Like it's not true, and it's not Western. And I'll give like the clinch, the sort of like the thing that should really just put this to rest, the stake in the heart of this fucking issue, is that the current world we're living in, that's been created by the European and British Enlightenment over the last 500 years, and it's extended out into the rest of the world. It didn't have to happen now. It could have happened in Hellenic Greece. It could have happened in Baghdad. And it could have happened in Florence. Those are at least 3 situations that I know about historically. There might have been other situations where it could have happened where, like, free people were able to start criticizing knowledge and institutions and rulers and that sort of stuff, and they were quenched by basically, like, overzealous authoritarian regimes. And we live in the one time that I know of in human history where that culture of criticism has, like, actually gotten the fuck out of, like, one little country and has spread all over the world. And now there's people all over the world in places as diverse from Indonesia to the UK to Australia to like Peru, where there's these little buildings where people can create new knowledge and they're not being subjected to just like, you have to believe a certain thing.
Yeah, and I'm optimistic that genie's out of the bottle. I think in individual countries, like, I don't know, if the University of Oregon Geography Department got to determine the cultural direction of North America, then I'm sure that this culture of being able to error correct would die out pretty quickly. But the thing is, it just gives a culture such a massive competitive advantage to have this sort of ability to self-criticize that, like, it's given that it's gone global, it is going to be present in some place. It's going to allow for such an advantageous amount of technology and knowledge generation versus places which don't have it, that I think it will survive, but it doesn't have to be in the West.
Yeah, science is Mr. Worldwide. It's Pitbull.
Yeah, it's Pitbull.
It's gone global.
Pitbull is actually the global ambassador of science.
Pitbull is the global ambassador for science. Damn, this episode's actually gotten me into rant mode. Fuck me.
The Nobel Committee just for the next 1,000 years decides to keep awarding all of the Nobel Prizes to Pitbull. They're like, nah, look, this
to
Mr. Worldwide is basically the scientific posture in one bald king.
He gets awarded the Fields Medal. He gets awarded the Turing Prize. He gets awarded like just every single scientific prize ever.
Yeah, every year,
in all categories. Mr. Worldwide, science ambassador for the human race. Bitch.
We shoot him into space so that he can evangelize to other cultures on different planets.
He's like
the greatest among us.
The blue guy out of. He's the greatest among us. Yeah, so I know for some reason, okay, Jack's had to put up with me going through this bullshit. Like, my girlfriend has, like, other people have, of me just like we say in Aboriginal Australia, like walking in two worlds. And I was like, the idea of like trying to straddle both like an Indigenous context, social context, and kind of the like post-colonial Australian context. You know, maybe people would have said white. I don't like saying white Australia anymore because Australia is such a multicultural fucking country anyways. Like, it's just a bullshit way to think about it. But like, two worlds. Okay, so Indigenous and like broader Australian worlds. My resolution to it so far has been, hey, actually, what we need to do is just be highly critical. Like, you know, like, I've started the book club from hell with Jack, and a lot of what we do is just criticize everything.
Yeah.
So I strongly believe or strongly value the culture of criticism, and part of valuing that culture of criticism means that on the one hand, yes, I think there's some valid criticisms to throw at the Western or whatever institutions, and especially historically, but you could even say there's still stuff today that needs to be fixed, and that's great, we can fix those. But we don't fix those by all this nonsense around just like, let's pick an indigenous community or a particular demographic group, whether it's transgendered people or women or whatever, and just use them as like our shields to like, essentially what they're doing is it's kind of like this weird paternalistic scapegoat move that these academics have pulled.
Yeah. And then, okay, so being generous, you could say that this article represents an attempt to criticize, to self-criticize within the Western context. And that's, that's good. That's how we generate new knowledge. But simply the act of criticism doesn't mean that something is valid. Like, just criticizing something in itself is not useful. You need to be criticizing with, like, what I would regard as in good faith, like criticizing to generate something new, rather than basically criticize and then, having criticized, just put in place whatever intellectual structure you've come up with, and because you have criticized, say that somehow validates your suggested way of living or way of viewing the world.
So I like the way that you put it before. It's an ideology of entropy. I think that so perfectly encapsulates like some of the attitudes that like people like this bring.
Well, it's just like the roll up and die ideology.
Hate the West. Yeah, what a bunch of bullshit. But here's the thing: is like the only.
Sorry. No, go on. I was just going to say something rude. No, go. You're probably going to say something much more constructive.
It's okay. Like, the criticism's super important, but like when you criticize something, bring forward like I'm not talking about this book club, because on this book club we reserve every right to just talk shit and be absolutely not productive at all. But this is entertaining people. This is a paramilitary operation. Yeah, we're entertaining people.
The paramilitary wing of Book Club from Hell is our constructive response to the world.
Yeah, this is an entertainment podcast where you get ranted at by Levi every now and then spontaneously. Fuck me. This topic has gotten me worked up.
This paper got me angrier than most things we've read for this.
It's like, you got to go, criticize something. Good, criticize, except then offer like be constructive about it. Criticize and then like add something. Like, how do you fix it?
Yeah, because seriously,
maybe these people do think that they're trying to be constructive. Maybe some parts of it can be constructive.
Okay, so their constructiveness is they propose the feminist glaciological framework, which, okay, so spoiler, their framework is basically we need to hold all of these different ways of understanding glaciers as more or less equal. And it's like, okay, well, that depends on what your goal is. So if your goal is, for example, to document the different ways in which different cultures understand glaciers, fine. Yeah, okay, document them. If your goal is to counteract climate change, which is the stated goal at the beginning of this article of the feminist glaciological framework, then their whole thing about how, like, they told a story about how they were in the Andes and they met with some, like, locals there who said that you can't eat fatty food around glaciers because if the fat spills, it will become a glacier, or it can make the glaciers slip and, I don't know, like pancake you if they run you over or something like that. And it's like, not going to help us with climate change. I'm sorry. I'm sure it's a great story and it helps situate a certain culture in the world, but that is not going to change the course of climate change. Like, that is flat out not going to help.
It's like that scene from Austin Powers, I think The Spy Who Shagged Me was a Golden Gun, where they're in the roller, like there's like one of those giant trucks that's got like the rolling pin on it, and they're like driving down this like secret lair, and there's one of the henchmen, the guards, is just standing there shouting out like "Stop!" And it goes on for like 2 minutes of them rolling towards us, "Stop!" And then it just like squishes him. It's like you in the glacier because you spilt your fucking like oil. The glacier starts like rolling towards you or like melting towards you, and you're just standing there going, "Stop, glacier, stop!" For like 10,000 years while it slowly grinds you into the ground.
Yeah. And then when it finally happens, you put it down to eating a BLT last Sunday or something like that in front of the glacier.
So here's a very good extract of. This is an extract from like some fucking academic who spoke to some people in some part of the world. I don't give a shit about the details.
Only expect the highest levels of academic integrity on the book club from hell.
The glaciers these women speak of, I think they were in the Andes. The glaciers these women speak of, explains Cruikshank, engage all the senses. The glaciers are willful, capricious, easily excited by human intemperance, but equally placated by quick-witted human responses. Proper behaviour is deferential. I was warned, for instance, about firm taboos against cooking with grease near glaciers that are offended by such smells. Cooked food, especially fat, might grow into a glacier overnight if improperly handled. The narratives Cruikshank collected show how humans and nature are intimately linked, and subsequently demonstrate the capacity of folk glaciologies to diversify the field of glaciology and subvert the hegemony of the natural sciences. Okay, so that, to me, is the antipathy. It's just like that is the crux of everything that we've been talking about. That is such horseshit. It's just complete horseshit. It's complete horseshit. Okay, what these people just said, if you take it as an explanation of the world, is not true. And it's not a matter of, oh, well, the Western science says that the glacier is made out of H2O atoms, or H2O molecules, and actually the local indigenous, like, knowledges say that the glacier is made out of the spirits of their ancestors. Well, both of those statements could be wrong, but they both can't be right. And Popper puts this just so beautifully at the end of, he has an addendum to the Open Society and its enemies. And the addendum is this little chapter at the end where he's explaining like different parts of his epistemology. This is like an add-on to people who haven't read his epistemological works. And the little section is called "Two Wrongs Don't Make Two Rights." Mm-hmm. And if you think that two people come to have... Yeah, he's a great writer as well. If you imagine two people, Jack and Levi, come to have a conversation, they disagree about something, and we create a 2x2 matrix of the outcome of that conversation, and that 2x2 matrix is Jack and Levi walk away agreeing, Jack and Levi walk away disagreeing because one is right and one is wrong, so that's two of the cells. And then the other one of the cells is like, both of them walk away from the conversation disagreeing, but agreeing to, if you imagine like agreeing to disagree, where you don't actually make any progress because nobody actually just admits that they were wrong in the first place. Mm-hmm. And both people just walk away just as ignorant as they were at the beginning of the conversation. And Popper's point is basically when he says like two wrongs don't make two rights, he was leveling a criticism at essentially like relativism in all its forms, whether it's cultural relativism or like some other form of relativism, where you and I could just like, I'm Indigenous, Jack's white Australian, so we come and we have a conversation about like, I don't know, like where does the water come from out of the ground? Does it come from the ancestors' spirits or does it come from like a fucking spring up in the mountains or some other source? It's like, if we disagree with it, like I'm wrong or Jack's wrong, but if we just say, oh, you know what, like, ha, kumbaya fucking ya, like, let's just agree that, like, it simultaneously comes from the spring and it comes from your ancestors' spirits. It's like, that's not helpful. That's not a helpful situation to be in. That is a completely unhelpful situation to be in. And what these people are doing in this fucking article is they're doing exactly that.
Yeah.
They're not actually saying, hey, actually, these people who have generated these stories, maybe we value them for some aesthetic or historical or anthropological reason, but they're possessing that explanation and protecting it through cultural relativism or post-colonial whatever like ethics, and they're not actually submitting it to criticism, means that those people because those people don't just have explanations about glaciers that are false, they have explanations about other things in their world that are false. And the fact that those explanations are full of mysticism and entities that don't exist and broken causal relationships between things means that when those people go to do stuff to fix problems in their lives, they're ineffective.
It's also like it's just this. It's what you said. This condescending attitude, because at the same time, actually, I was about to say these people don't have a problem with Westerners like, updating their beliefs to more effectively solve problems. I think it's in some ways these people do have a problem with that. At least in theory, they do like it when those things, make the Wi-Fi signal better or give them a better phone. But it seems sometimes that only Westerners are allowed, or are adult enough to survive having their beliefs criticized.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, these brown people. If you tell them that glaciers aren't offended by the smell of cooking fat, then they're not going to be able to handle that. Let's just keep it quiet. This sounds dumb to say, but like they're people too. Like they're running the same hardware. I think they can handle it.
They'll be fine.
Like they're not going to just stop being able to understand the world if you go, maybe there are different ways of understanding the world, and some of them actually allow for knowledge creation, for the creation of technology, which ultimately allows a greater ability to defend your culture. If you're wealthy and have the technology to sustain yourself.
Yeah, if you're dirt poor, your culture will go extinct.
Yeah. It's like, no, your culture is going to become more defensible.
And here's the thing, like, we can always say that, like, okay, like, a particular, say, like, I don't know, say it might be, like, an aesthetic pattern within a culture, like, I don't know, like an artistic motif. I'd say, okay, that's one part of culture. We might want to keep those. Or we might even say that, like, for the purposes of, like, teaching our kids about morals, we're going to keep certain stories that are, like, not... like, maybe our ancestors would have considered them explanations of the world, but we don't consider them explanations of the world anymore, but they contain good moral knowledge, they're, like, allegorical value, and so we're going to keep those stories. But there might be stories that I keep from my Aboriginal background that I might tell my kids because I think they might have like some allegorical value. But to actually say that that is actually how the world works is a different thing. And so I think what these people are trying to do is essentially they're pussyfooting around. They're trying to, they've got intense amounts of white guilt that it slaps you in the face when you read the fucking paper, and like. and
it's so intense.
And the thing is, like, white people in these situations, good hearts, they mean the best. I'm going to take these people as much shit as I'm talking about them. I'm just going to say, like, I'm sure they're well-meaning people, and what they're trying to do is like kind of atone, so to speak, for the sins of their forebears who were committed to cultural genocide in places like Australia and the unit. And that is bad, and we definitely do not want cultural genocide. But the solution to that is not to treat false theories as equal to good explanations generated through severe criticism and bold conjectures about, say, the structure of atoms and the way that, say, the energetics of the sun affect glaciers. Like, that is just not on. That's not how we make progress anywhere, regardless of what culture you come from. And to say that, like, the reaction, the solution to, like, making up for, like, the cultural genocide of, like, indigenous peoples or whatever all around the Western world, like like places like America, the solution to that is not to then treat indigenous people like they're fucking children.
Yeah, it seems almost encouraging them to cultural stasis. But just stop them from updating knowledge and just hold them in place and go, okay, no, this is good. Just stay that way.
But the flip side is that like all these people around the world, like if you walk into like a village in like with a few exceptions, which I will concede there are exceptions to what I'm about to say. And I think those exceptions should be respected if that's what the people want. Yeah, it's like consent is very important. But most people, if they live in, say, a village in the Amazon and they can't see anything after the sun sets unless it's by firelight, if you walk in and you show them a fucking torch, they will want it. They will want the torch.
Yeah, well, the fact that they're using the torch, firelight, and if you show them like they want light at night. Like if they're already using fire, they are already offering solutions to that problem. You're just coming in with a better solution. They want the torch.
They want the electricity. They want the electricity. When they see fucking YouTube and just the infinite amounts of free education that you can get, they will all... Look, in 10 years, everybody in the fucking Amazon will have an Android phone and they'll have an uplink to Starlink and they'll all be streaming. They'll all be able to get equal access, the same access that you and I have to Pornhub.
Yeah.
And to MIT OpenCourseWare. A kid in the middle of the Amazon will be able to get an MIT education in computer science. Full MIT computer science curriculum for free, completely free in the middle of the Amazon. That's what they'll be able to get. And the idea that the thing that produced that, Western civilization, that's somehow just completely bad and corrupt, and that we just need to leave those kids and those people in the fucking dark in the middle of the Amazon, when like it's pretty obvious that when you take them clean drinking water and like technology for like treating dirty water and providing electricity and like information communications technology, those people want those things.
Yeah, gee, not getting Jardia is great, they say.
Yeah, like fuck me. It's like, you know, something that's always tripped me out is like, I've been so up on my fucking high horse this episode.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's like when we talked about Varg and we just said like, this is dumb. It's in that same way, although a difference is, I think Varg's malicious. I really don't think these four authors are malicious. I just think they're
not being malicious. No,
very
they're misguided.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think, okay, what if we try to give them benefit of the doubt or whatever and just say, like, it's good to criticise the Western institutions. Some of the issues in Western institutions are things like institutionalised sexism, sexual assault on campuses, you know? Like, like the idea that, say, a young woman, say 19 years old, goes to a lecture hall and, you know, there's an actual real risk that they might be sexually assaulted by their lecturer, I think is abhorrent and does need to be called out. I know sexual abuse doesn't just happen to women, but, you know, like, as far as I'm aware, at least on campuses, like, there seems to be, I mean, it might be an over-reporting thing or something like that, but, like, it does seem to be a big issue. And I think, like, okay, like, fair enough. Call that shit out. Like, get those fucking academics, those, in this case, like, male academics, out of those fucking institutions, fire them, or press charges or whatever, and fix that problem. But that doesn't mean that, like, the entire, like, system is completely broken from the ground. Like, we don't need to, like, get rid of it. We need to correct those fucking issues.
Yeah. What about from the next part, the gendered science and knowledge part? I found a quote which is, it's wild the extent to which hyper-progressive and Evolian thought regarding gender crosses over. So here's a really good quote. So, these scholars and others since have argued that the Baconian view of knowledge engendered a strong tendency in the environmental sciences to classify, measure, map, and ideally dominate and control non-human nature as if it were a knowable and predictable machine rather than dynamic, chaotic, unpredictable, and coupled natural human systems. I love here that it maps onto Evola Land so well in that masculinity is this rigid, dividing, law-giving system of domination, whereas the feminine nature is earthly, chaotic, and unpredictable. It's just like, you could read this article in an Evolian way, and much of it would actually make sense from that perspective. It's fucking crazy.
It's this weird thing where, like, the political, or I don't know if it's even a political spectrum, the ideological spectrum just like wraps around on itself like a Mobius strip.
It all reaches
it's like
into the
it's
world
like Terence
of being.
McKenna. Yeah, and it's like Terence. That what you just read could have come out of the mouth of Terence McKenna, or it could have come out of the mouth of Julius Evola. Turns out that M. Jackson is a devout Evolian.
There is a unity of knowledge, and it is
metaphysician. And there is a unity of knowledge. I don't agree with that. I don't agree with them.
Yeah. The another thing that in this section they talk about a lot, which I disagree with quite fundamentally, is they keep talking about how the scientific method or the scientific posture is fundamentally flawed because it has this, they regard it as a childish view of objectivity, of the ability to be objective with respect to knowledge. And I really disagree with that. So I think you could meet plenty of scientists whom I would regard as fairly unreflective, who would, I guess maybe at least in passing, regard what they're doing as objective. But to my mind, the scientific worldview really arose in response to this fundamental question of how do we reduce subjectivity and how do we reduce bias in generating these theories of the world. Like, to say that science doesn't even consider that it could be anything other than objective, I think misses the complete point of science. Science exists as a response to the question of course we are fundamentally subjective, like we view things from a subjectivity. But how do we reduce the interference of that on our ability to try to describe the world? That's fundamental. That's almost the foundational question of science. It's just like this entire section is like you just totally missed the point. Have you ever talked to a real scientist?
It's the issue around like Thomas Kuhn and I think it's how you pronounce his name. Thomas Kuhn. He wrote the Structure of Scientific Revolutions. And then there's also people like you might be able to speak a little bit more to like the post-structuralist types, like how do I put this? They think that science is this big machine that like churns out knowledge and then encodes like all the flaws of the people who produce that knowledge. But
yeah, that's a really good way of putting it.
The thing is that the machine doesn't work because, or it doesn't work in order to instantiate those people's flaws and then like roll them out to the rest of the world. It works in spite of the flaws. Like the beauty of the scientific like culture, the culture of criticism and the scientific worldview is that we basically just had the humility to say, hey, individually, we are all full of like mistakes and errors and ignorance. And even when we come together, we make a lot of mistakes. But if we just like keep at this thing, eventually, like over the course of many, many years, in the case of some situations like decades or centuries, we will improve. And that is in spite of our flaws. We've come up with a mechanism to make progress in spite of the flaws of all of the participants.
Yeah. And I think just that insight. So what you just laid out basically invalidates this entire section of saying that basically because most scientists, and especially those who came up with the philosophy behind science in the West, were male, it is in some way foundationally male and can only ever understand the male subjectivity. And as I said earlier, the scientific method it fundamentally exists to address this problem of, well, I view the world from a subjectivity. How can I reduce the distortion of that subjectivity? Yeah, this part just totally missed the point.
these people don't understand what they're talking about. So another profound and interesting point that Popper made. It was. I think I actually sent Jack a text message about this when I read this essay. There's this book called Objective Knowledge. It was written in 1972, so 50 years was the 50th anniversary last year of this book being published by Karl Popper, Objective Knowledge. It's a collection of some of his essays. One of the essays is called Epistemology Without a Knowing Subject.
Yes, you did send me this.
Epistemology without a knowing subject. And it is a groundbreaking, like, when I read that, I was like, oh shit, that is what he's fucking talking. What he's saying is that, okay, like other people, like Ayn Rand and her objectivism, but also the Bayesian epistemologists, quote-unquote epistemologists, but also the Kantians, also the empiricists, the reason why they have all tripped up is because they weren't able to abstract a theory of knowledge outside, get the idea of knowledge away from the subjectivity of the person creating or engaging with the knowledge. And Popper did that. He was the first person who did that. And what he realized is, hey, knowledge is actually something out there in the world, and we engage with it with our mind. He calls it the three worlds. It's a very interesting framework that he's thought of. Basically, as I was explaining at the beginning of the episode, like, information is physically instantiated in like physical objects, like your computer that's running right now is like interacting with information and knowledge. And therefore, like, you could actually, like, in principle, not that you could do it in practicality, but in principle, you could specify the three-dimensional location of every instance of a piece of knowledge where it is on the surface of the planet. Like, there's certain knowledge, say the theory of Einsteinian relativity, is not instantiated right now on a planet going around Alpha Centauri. It's only instantiated in, like, books and laptops and diagrams and in people's memories right now here on Earth in specific, actual, concrete, physical locations in space-time. And that means it's like a physical entity. And once he had that breakthrough, he realized, oh, this unifies, like, Darwinian evolution and the knowledge encoded in genomes. It unifies, like, computer science and how, like, computation is about, like, getting physical systems to process information, and also unifies, like, our epistemology, how we're creating things in our mind, which is to say that, like, hopefully one day, we will have physics of knowledge and its creation. And we'll be able to talk about, like, here's knowledge out there in the world, here's the laws that govern its creation and its growth and its distribution and all that sort of stuff. And essentially, like, what these people don't realize is that they think, because they have this kind of subjectivist point of view, that in a way the cultural instantiation of, like, Western scientific values in institutions is a way of basically, like, imprinting the subjectivity of Western born people on all the other peoples of the world. And that's where they get this villain victim, like, dichotomy. But that is not what is happening. Like, we're actually creating, like, generating, producing information, encoding it and instantiating in physical objects. And that knowledge is objective in the sense that, like, it objectively exists outside of the human, like, subjectivity.
So you sent this to me and I read it, and that's the aspect that it just feels so spooky. And it's the sort of thing where
it's fucking crazy.
I guess it's like in day-to-day, in my day-to-day existence, I kind of just think of knowledge as existing. It's like it's just a thing. Like, the medium that it's encoded in and the knowledge itself are just kind of de facto think of as being more or less the same thing. But when you really, when you think about how there's some sort of knowledge that exists independently of whatever it's instantiated in, or it can be instantiated in different ways. It just feels so spooky. There's something.
It's so cool.
It's not the material itself, it's the relationship between the constituent parts of whatever medium it's expressed in. That relationship is the knowledge in some way. It's It's
so beautiful.
It's so
truly beautiful.
Spooky is the best way I can put it. There's something very strange going on.
Yeah, it's a deep mystery, and it's that is the pathway towards answering the question of qualia. You know, like, just for listeners, like the qualia, like, I studied neuroscience in my undergrad. Shout out to Names if you're listening. Shout out to Names. Because Names said he I met him at the meetup. He said he was interested in potentially studying neuroscience. So fucking go at it, man. So there's this deep question of like qualia. So like qualia are like the aspects of and the components of your subjective experience. So like the redness of an apple. You look at the apple, it's got a certain quality, and that's happening somewhere in your mind. But like when we look at a physical brain from the outside in, we look at it and it's not like there's images flickering. We don't see, it's not like an LCD screen or something. Like, where are the qualia? We look at it from the outside in and we don't see any qualia. But from the inside out, there's qualia. Deep mystery.
Yeah.
Okay. That mystery is somewhere to be found in this idea that like information and knowledge and its relationship to physical substrates, there's like an autonomy you know, like when you study the theory of computation, no, that's a bad example. Can I give an example? Like, there's law. Here's a good example. Okay, so like when I say that like a particular algorithm has like some runtime complexity, I'm saying like how many operations does the algorithm take to perform as a function of the size of the input? Is it like an exponential or is it a linear growth function, that sort of thing? That is a statement about the algorithm, not about the physical hardware it's instantiated on. And if I take the same algorithm, put it on an M1 chip or like, I don't know, like an ASIC, or no, not an ASIC, because that's a good example because that's Bitcoin. So like there's an ASIC chip that runs a SHA-256 hashing algorithm, and there's my computer. Okay, that algorithm forces the hardware to do something. And it doesn't matter that like the ASIC chip is just specialized. It can do it faster, but it doesn't get around the runtime complexity of computing SHA-256. It has to brute force that, and it's not a fun algorithm. That's why we get specialized like chips to do it. And the issue is, and the thing that people don't just like take completely for granted, is that we're running all these web services, right? And you don't know if it's running on like a computer made out of like like running Linux, or running like a Windows server, and is it running like on this chip or that chip? Well, that's because the algorithms are in an autonomous they have autonomous complexity. We can make statements about them independent of like their physical substrate they're instantiated in. And so the only reason that can happen is because knowledge is objective in the sense that it exists, like it has its causal influence independent of the subjectivity of any knowledge creating interpreter, such as a human.
The best way I can describe how I feel when I think about this sort of thing is how I got to go diving in Lord Howe Island, which is a really beautiful place. And we basically went off the, so the island is part of an old volcano. And so it's pretty shallow water, but then at one point it drops from tens of meters to hundreds of meters to kilometers really quickly. And when I think about these sorts of things, I get the same feeling as when I swam off the edge of that, and you just see the seabed drop into blackness. You get the feeling that you're peeking into something very, very profound that you can't quite make sense of, but you're trying your best.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of what makes it so fun, right? Can I give you one more example why this is like so profoundly like interesting what Pop is saying, and why what these people don't fucking know what they're talking about. Like, we have this issue in like the biosciences, right, where it's like, okay, what is the unit of like evolution, right? That's where like the neo-Darwinists with like molecular biology come in and they say that like the gene is, there's some interesting stuff around like epigenome research that's happening at the moment, but like I don't know enough about that to like comment too much, but like the gene, so like Dawkins would say like the gene is the unit of like evolution, and whereas like E.O. Wilson, there's these people called group selectionists, and the group selectionists are basically like evolution is happening at like the level of like some group phenomena, such as like a species. But once you get your head around the objectivity of knowledge, the fact that information is physically instantiated in actual physical substrates, the group selectionists, E.O. Wilson, I believe. There's some other interesting prominent biologists. I think Brett Weinstein might be a group selectionist. I can't remember. Like they have to answer the question of like, where is the information physically instantiated, and why? How is there information communication between different members of like individual members of that species? How is like what's the actual physical mechanism causing causing the evolution, whereas like the neo-Darwinists can literally point at like the snippet of DNA and say, look, there's the molecule.
Mm-hmm.
When there's a germline like variation, this is what happens, and the reason why that particular individual's offspring looks like this is because there was this allele in that parent versus like this other like individual of the species doesn't have that allele. Like it's down to that level of granularity. You have to actually specify like the substrate. That's how profoundly important this stuff is.
Well, the substrate is
the reason why. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. It's okay. So I'm just thinking out loud here, but it just seems like where the knowledge really lies is the relationship between the constraints imposed by just the very nature of the physical substrate. So the physical substrate of, say, a gene.
Yeah.
The relationship between that and how something can operate within the system, like that's where the knowledge is. And
It's
really
crazy.
spookily, you can move to a different physical system which imposes different constraints. And so long as things operating within that system interact with the physical constraints in some sort of analogous way, it can be encoding the same knowledge. And that's just
Isomorphically.
That's just so mind-bending. But the thing is, like, it works.
It's fucking
we
nuts.
we know it works.
It works. It's fucking crazy.
Yeah, it's just like it is.
Like, just think about a DNA molecule, right? Like, okay, I could specify a bunch of parameters that would be like, say, the distance between, like, say, a nitrogen atom and an oxygen atom or a carbon atom, like, in the chain. And, or I could say, like, the vibration frequency of those. But those, the interesting thing is, like, that's a type of information as well, you might say. But it doesn't matter. That's not the part that's encoding the knowledge. It's the pattern, the ATCG. Like, there's all these physical parameters going on, but actually only one of them actually matters.
Yeah.
And
the thing is,
it's fucking
once
weird.
You work out enough about almost the laws within a particular substrate, you can start porting knowledge between different substrates, like
Between
same
substrates,
knowledge.
yeah.
It's so I'm not religious, but when I think about these things, it almost feels like you're looking at the face of God, like something very spooky is going on in the world.
Like, get this right, with CRISPR technology, you can go into, like, a jellyfish, cut out a fluorescent gene, and take that gene from the jellyfish and put it into a rabbit and make the rabbit, like, fluorescent. You see, Chris? Like, so the group selectionist has to explain why that's happening. To me, like, once we get to the point where we can actually cut out bits of information and transplant them between not just different members of the same species, but literally, like, species as different as, like, jellyfish. Like, when was the last common ancestor of a rabbit and a jellyfish? Like, a billion years ago?
A really long time ago.
Like, okay, therefore, there's information encoded in that specific piece of DNA, and we've not only moved the physical atoms, but we've moved the knowledge physically through like space-time and put it into a different body, and now it's had the same effect. It's made the rabbit glow.
Yeah. And I just feel like so that
psychedelic, man.
That way of viewing the world, I find much more gratifying, and I think it's just much more constructive than sort of this entropic view of the world as espoused by the authors of the Feminist Glaciology paper, which seems to basically be motivated by, it's almost like they can't be bothered doing the hard work of looking through different cultures and seeing, okay, which parts of these are generating knowledge in a way that really benefits the people within those cultures. And because I think I agree to a large extent with what the authors of The Sovereign Individual said about cultures, how much of culture is
by largely
like an evolved response to local conditions. It's like, so which... Yeah. They're not going to be devoid of like truths that can be, say, ported between cultures. Like they're not arbitrary. But it seems like the authors of this paper have looked at just the multiplicity of human experiences and human cultures, and instead of knuckling down and doing the hard work of saying, okay, we've got all of these different groups of people trying to work out like what is going on Earth or in existence generally, and which things can we learn from these and generalize to other cultures. Instead, they've just thrown up their hands and gone, oh, it's too hard, isn't it? They're all right, I guess.
Yeah, so two wrongs don't make two rights. It's the height of laziness.
It's like it's an it's an intellectual edifice that exists to justify their profound intellectual laziness.
It's an intellectual edifice that exists to justify their fat fucking paychecks.
Can't even speak properly, just keep saying fuck.
Yeah. Fucking, I'm so angry that this person has a fucking Fulbright scholarship. It's just my envy, really. No,
yeah. So, okay,
I just think that
the section Systems of Scientific Domination, we've basically been talking about this the whole time. So they say that this is where they talk about, they call it Western science. Again, as we've talked about, as if it's the exclusive domain of Westerners, as Western science existing to dominate non-Westerners. And when they say non-Westerners, like, it always feels like they're just saying white people. As if, like...
Yeah, it is. They're just saying white
people. Like people who are ethnically Han Chinese in Australia somehow aren't Australians or something like that. It's just so...
is that called dog whistling?
This shit pisses me off.
Are they just dog whistling? I'm sure these people are nice people.
I don't think they're malicious. I just think they've been basically smelling their own farts for too long.
Can I give you a quote from Systems of Scientific Domination?
Yeah.
There's a great quote. It goes, structures, I think it might be the first thing they say, but structures of power and domination also stimulated the first large-scale ice core drilling projects. These archetypical masculinist projects to literally penetrate glaciers and extract measurement and exploitation the ice and exploit the ice in Greenland and Antarctica. It's like a Freudian. A Freudian will always see dicks, you know?
Yeah. But even Freud said, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. And I think in this case, sometimes an ice core drill is just a drill. I don't think it's actually this, like, it's an emergence of a sublimated desire to penetrate Mother Earth with an ordered masculine representation of the penis. I just think they're drilling for ice cores.
Yeah. And what do they like? Here's the thing. Here's why it's an ideology of entropy. Because let's just say you care about understanding the stuff that like maybe what happened, what conditions the ice was in 10,000 years ago. So you do want the ice core, because you're a feminist you're a feminist glaciologist, and you want to understand the history of the ice. But now, because of your ideology, you don't want to penetrate the ice. you've got to do something. What's their proposed solution to like getting that information and getting like how are they going to go and get that data now? They've just barred themselves from taking the ice cores.
Well, that was a question I had for much of this article, where like what sort of world are they meaningfully wanting to create? So your point about the ice cores is a perfect example of that. Like what? Yeah, exactly. Like what do they meaningfully want to do? So okay, ice core. It's like big evil dick fucking the Antarctic, or like some dumb Freudian shit like that. What do you want instead? Like what is a vaginal way of getting ice samples? It's like what do you want? Like what the fuck do you want?
What's a vaginal way of getting the ice samples, motherfuckers?
It's like, actually, though, it's like, I don't think that the debate on climate change needs to be less serious. But that just seems to be
more serious.
That seems to be what they're proposing. We don't need less seriousness in this.
It's saying maybe we need to lick it.
Penetrated
like
their feet with They've metaphorically penetrated their feet with the masculine expression of a bullet flying through the air and drilling through soft, organic, feminine structures. Yep.
Yeah, I think that's I mean, again, this is like the Terence McKenna stuff around like dominator cultures and partnership cultures. It's more of that crap.
Yeah. Yeah. So they do. Okay, so we were talking about what do they want instead of masculine science. They do in chapter 6 or section 6, alternative representations somewhat address this. It's just, again, in a way that I think is unserious.
I don't think they're serious.
So they complain that the natural sciences are privileged in the discourses around cryoscapes and say that we need to have alternative forms of understanding cryoscapes that aren't from the natural sciences. And I'm perfectly open to that. But I don't think that knowledge is valid just because it comes from a non-scientific source. Whereas their prime criteria for accepting something as valid seem to be, is it not from a Western country? Is it not from a white person? Is it not from a scientist? And it's like, I don't see those three things and go, okay, yes, this knowledge is now valid. It's just not how that's not how I assign salience to something.
Yeah, but Jack, you are
I am also a white, Western, scientifically educated man, so
you're
take that as you will. Yeah.
You're heterosexual.
Heterosexual, yeah.
All right, like how many
I'm
more
actually
sins
ticking all
do
the
you
boxes,
have to-
or not ticking them.
You're ticking all the boxes of an oppressor, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah.
So really, I don't care what you just said.
Which means, and so this is one of the things that irritates me about these sort of articles, in that they set up, and this is not exclusive to wacky social sciences. You see this all over the place in really bad thinking, where they'll set up whatever intellectual edifice they're interested in setting up, and then oftentimes they will set conditions for being able to criticize that structure. And basically, as those conditions, they'll basically have, if you in any way are inclined to disagree with this, then you are not able to disagree with it. So it reminded me of the quality of thought in Practical Female Psychology for the Practical Man, which we covered in a previous episode, where
the highest quality.
So, for example, they've got the idea of female subcommunication, which is where women will express their desires, except they won't do it in direct speech. They'll do it in basically their body language, their tone of voice, basically everything except them saying what they want. And this allows the authors of the book to basically interpret everything women do in the worst possible light. And then they remove your ability to disagree with the concept of female subcommunication, because they say, okay, if a woman disagrees by saying, I don't do that, then she's doing it subconsciously. So she's not aware of it. So long as a woman says that she doesn't do this or that women don't do this, then they're not aware of subcommunication. If a man says that women don't do this, he is being brainwashed by female subcommunication, by womanese, in the words of the three august authors of Practical Female Psychology for the Practical Man. So actually, you are only in a position to evaluate whether female subcommunication is a real phenomenon or not if you already agree that it exists. And these authors are doing the same thing. If someone disagrees with them, they'll say, well, obviously you belong to some group which will disagree, but that is because you belong to, I don't know, some Western mind virus, like that sort of thought. It's so disingenuous. So that was a long rant.
No, it's good. I fucking have dominated this like a cis heterosexual white male. I've dominated this conversation, and I've man-spread my opinion into the space.
Raped the conversation around
my intellect. I've raped the conversation. I've penetrated your mind with my gawk. Okay. So I just want to. Okay, one quick. I should probably head off soon because he's waiting to have dinner with me. But I just want to give some concluding remarks and respond to what you just said. There's with one last bit of wisdom from Mr. Popper. Popper's, I talk about Popper a lot because I respect the man. But at the end of the day, the fact that people call it Popperian epistemology, he would probably not like, because that puts him in a position of authority. But his key insight is that there is no authoritative source of knowledge. The truth content of knowledge is not dependent on its source. And that was his basic key. That was essentially, if you could say what was Popper's major contribution to the species, his contribution was basically moving past the idea of what people or philosophers call justified true belief, which is by what means can we justify our beliefs as true? He said there is no means. You can't justify it, and no matter whether it's the Kantians who said, it's because it comes from our rationality and reason, or the empiricists who said it comes from it's knowledge derived from the authority of our sense perceptions, or whether it's like the deists who say that knowledge is derived as authoritative because it comes from the God thing, or whether it's like the objectivists who say something similar to the Kantians. Like, they're all wrong because
it came from Atlas Shrugged.
It came from Bitcoin, which is true, and praise be to Satoshi. But his major contribution was to basically realize that all knowledge contains error, all knowledge is incomplete, and the fact that the knowledge was produced by person A instead of person B, or institution X instead of institution Y, is completely fucking irrelevant. The mnemonic that I use in my head to keep this forefront is I say to myself, judge an idea based on its content and its merit, not based on its source or provenance. Where it came from does not matter. In other words, if Jack and I say the same statement, the fact that Jack's skin is white and my skin is brown does not change the truth content of that statement, unless in the only exception is when the statement actually refers to something about the subjective content of what I'm experiencing, say a statement about my emotional state or something like that. Except in that, and even then, actually, you can still apply because you can still be in error about your own emotional states. So even in that situation, and so that was his key contribution. And what these people try to do, what the fucking relativists do, what the Marxists do, what all these people try to do, is they try to say that because the knowledge was produced by a person or an institution from a particular background, whether it was by a man or a woman or a bourgeois person or a person inside the Politburo or whatever, they try to say that that invalidates or validates the knowledge, and it's just completely fucking irrelevant. It doesn't matter. Okay.
Yeah.
A glacier is not created by spilling oil on the ground. And it doesn't matter whether the person who said it was white or brown or yellow or fucking pink. It doesn't come from spilt oil. Conversation over. We don't need to have this. It's a fucking dumb conversation, and the fact that there's people employed at the University of Oregon or getting Fulbright scholarships or getting grants from the US National Science Foundation is a fucking indictment on the state of Western scientific institutions right now. They are the blight on the Western scientific institutions, not the thing that they are criticizing. They're the problem.
Yeah. So I know you got to go.
Sorry, that's my fucking rant.
So I'll read out a little bit about one of their proposed solutions of ways to understand glaciers, and like you can say about it what I expect you will say, and then we can wrap up the episode. But okay, so this is about referencing Katie Patterson, who's an ice artist. Which, when I read ice artist, I just thought of someone who smokes a ton of meth, but no, it's an artist who uses ice as a medium. So Patterson's artwork builds on an earlier project where she submerged a phone line connected to Vatnajökull. I don't speak Icelandic. Probably didn't pronounce that correctly. Iceland and Europe's largest glacier. People could call the glacier and listen to the distinctive pops, trills, and gurgles of the ice. More than 10,000 people called during the installation. Such a project demonstrates how the social constructions of space, time, and knowledge can be manipulated in significant ways and can engage human senses. Patterson's work challenges the conceits of scientific distance and impartiality. Glaciers are no longer remote, but just a phone call away. And it's like, it's an interesting art installation. I don't know how we can use that to counter climate change. Maybe I'm being unimaginative, but I think the ice cores, the big steel dick fucking glaciers in ice cores is probably just more useful if you're actually interested in combating climate change than calling a glacier.
A glacier call. Than giving it a call. Like, go and fucking it with your big drill. Your big drill. The big man with the big drill. Get to tear himself off a piece of that glacier. Yeah. I fucking love that. The big man with the big piece. Get himself a piece.
Yeah, look.
I love that shit.
If this were written with as good prose as Valerie Solanas wrote the Scum Manifesto, then I would have enjoyed it much more.
I'm just going to go back to what I said at the beginning. I'm going to get on a plane when I want to travel travel at 700 kilometers an hour, 10,000 feet above the surface of the planet for my intercontinental travel. I'm going to entrust an aerospace engineer, a Western trained aerospace engineer. I'm not going to ask a quote unquote folk aerospace engineer. There's not folk aerospace engineering and Western aerospace engineering. There's engineering that works, and there's everything else. And when it comes to solving large, significant problems,
it's just so dumb. It's like a Chinese person in Beijing could design a plane that works. Like, I actually don't give a shit. It either flies or it doesn't.
And when it comes to solving large, problems of any scale, from small problems to large planetary problems, like climate issues this century, that is going to be solved by science and engineering that works. It's not going to be solved by sitting around singing fucking Kumbaya, like patting each other on the fucking back. And so I think I'm going to say my last piece before we get into final words about review or whatever. I'm just going to say what Richard Dawkins said so fucking eloquently. Science, it works, bitches.
As obnoxious as I find Richard Dawkins, he's right. It's not about making explicit claims to the truth, like saying, okay, this theory is unambiguously true. You're asymptotically approaching whatever it is that is external to to humans, or whatever basically humans are instantiated as part of. It's a process of continuously improving your knowledge and updating it, not just saying that, not subscribing to what I regard as a pretty unproductive or just unfulfilling cult of criticism, where basically the act of criticizing something is what's important. Like, you just say that something is bad or something is problematic or that you don't like it or there are problems with something, and then say, oh, that's my work done. I don't need to do anything else. I have nothing more to add.
You're just tearing it down.
So it's just so unhelpful. And that's basically what this entire article is.
Yeah, you have a certain sect or stream or whatever within Western institutions, particularly in the social sciences, it seems, that are committed to, as Jack said, like an ideology of entropy. And it's really destructive. And then you've got honest to God, good, decent, like, people out there engaging in error correction and severe criticism and bold conjectures. And one of them is constructive and one of them is not constructive. And as well-meaning as I think these people are who wrote this, and I think they probably are well-meaning, I don't think they're actively trying to be malicious about it. I think that they are very, very, very far off the mark, and they're not being helpful.
Yeah. And where I go from finding it funny to getting actually quite angry is when they start talking not to, but about groups that have been historically or still are oppressed or poor, marginalized, and instead of telling them to do what is easier said than done and is difficult, but is necessary, of basically like the way that you protect yourselves is ultimately by being able to create new knowledge, error correct, generate and accumulate wealth to defend your culture. Instead of telling them that, it's basically telling them what will lead to dissolution, just stasis and decay of don't change anything, don't listen to anyone else, just stay exactly the same. Like, stop solving problems. And that really pisses me off. It's just not, it doesn't help anyone.
Yeah. And it doesn't help the people that they purport to speak on behalf of. So I need to get going, so I'm going to just say that you guys don't need to read this fucking piece of shit paper. Like, you can just
don't
listen
bother.
to you just re-listen to this episode another few times. And
yeah, it's not worth reading.
Shout out to Discord.
Anything else to say?
Any final thoughts?
Shout out to Yarp.
Shout out to Yarp. Shout out to San Marzano. Shout out to Names. We had our first meetup. We're going to try and organise more meetups globally. Book Club from Hell's going global up in this bitch, like Pitbull. We're going to figure out some stuff around meetups and all that sort of stuff. I'm
Pitbull doing a convincing Australian accent.
And yeah, we just appreciate if you made it to the 2-hour mark of this fucking episode. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
We're going to keep on doing stuff. Yeah.
What else? Oh, yeah. Patreon. Send us money.
Patreon.
I'm going to be publishing a book. I don't know, soonish, depending on when you're listening to this. I'll try to sell that to you through the podcast and the Discord server too.
Send us some money so Jack can eat something other than ramen. If you want to connect with like-minded people who have a strange and quirky sense of humor, and you don't like. Jack and I are in the Discord, but there's also a bunch of other weirdos that are good fun, you know, the occasional, you know, like thing maybe just like a little bit off, you know, like sometimes the humor's off, but you're like, sometimes if you're the sort of person who occasionally tells a joke, an edgy joke at a dinner party full of normies and you get looked at weirdly, hey, maybe the Discord is for you. So come join us.
Our Discord's good because we can error correct. When someone tells a joke that's over the line, everyone tells them that they're a fuckwit. That is the error correction of humor.
That's the error correction, yeah. Yeah, so come join the Discord, come hang out, and give us the money.
Yeah, that's the most important part. Currency.
Yeah, give us some cuck bucks whilst they're still in circulation.
All right, thank you for listening. Cuck bucks.